I'm 40 years old, working at a military research institute in Beijing, and still unmarried. When I was 20, I was in college and had a boyfriend. We were together for 3 years. We met in a university club, drawn together by shared interests, and genuinely liked each other. It was real love. His family came from a small third-tier city, an ordinary background. His parents were from the countryside, and he had two older brothers. The whole family squeezed into a tiny 120 square meter home. But we were happy together every single day. I still remember one holiday when he took me to see a movie. As soon as the film ended, right there in the theater, he got down on one knee with a bouquet of flowers and proposed. But instead of feeling joy or excitement, I felt fear. He had no house, his family wasn't well off, and while he treated me incredibly well, I realized I only loved how he treated me, not necessarily him. I couldn't imagine spending my future living in a rental apartment with him. Reality hit me hard, and I turned him down. I broke up with him. That may have been the closest I ever got to true love. At 25, I earned my master's degree from a top university in Beijing and landed a stable, respectable job. A senior colleague introduced me to a man with ideal qualifications, a Beijing local with a car, a house, and a high income for that time. He worked as a business manager at a major printing company. When we first met, I found him a little overweight and not particularly handsome, but he was financially secure, much better off than I was, and had a Beijing residency. On our first date, he treated me to an expensive meal and even gave me a designer handbag. His parents adored me, and they seemed easygoing, which made me feel hopeful. We dated for 6 months, but over time, I realized our values and mindsets didn't align. He didn't understand me, nor did he try to see things from my perspective. We argued constantly. I didn't love him, and I couldn't bring myself to overlook his lack of understanding. I always felt there was a wall between us. To be honest, the only moments of happiness I felt were when he gave me gifts. Beyond that, there was no love, no sense of fulfillment. Eventually, I broke up with him. I still wanted to marry for love. At 28, I met a man through a blind date. He was incredibly handsome, had great credentials, and was a doctor, a year older than me. I thought I had finally found happiness. 3 months into our relationship, I met his parents. But from the very first meeting, they bombarded me with endless personal questions, like an interrogation. It left a bad taste in my mouth. Later, they even messaged my boyfriend, telling him they didn't approve of me because our families weren't well matched. I never tried to see things from their perspective. I only felt that they were looking down on me. So, once again, I ended the relationship. By 30, panic set in. I was terrified I wouldn't get married. I cried in secret and threw myself into nonstop dating. I signed up for countless matchmaking apps, arranged multiple blind dates every weekend. But I realized I had lost the ability to love. No one sparked my interest. No one made me feel anything. Even when I added someone on WeChat, I had no desire to reply to their messages. I had met too many men. I was emotionally drained. I felt like I was just wasting my time. But deep down, I refused to give up. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I told myself, I have a master's degree, a stable job at a government-affiliated institution in Beijing, and decent qualifications. I deserve to find someone equally successful. But I kept hitting roadblocks. Many outstanding men rejected me because of my age. By 32, I could feel the shift. Fewer and fewer matchmakers were introducing me to people. And the men they did introduce were getting older and less desirable, either average guys well past their prime or divorced men with kids. I couldn't accept it. Some had decent qualifications, but their homes were too far away, or they were too old. Some were the right age and had good conditions, but they didn't feel anything for me. The ones who liked me, I didn't like. The ones I liked didn't like me. Before I knew it, I was 35. Anxiety hit me like a truck. Women have a biological clock, after all. I worried that if I had children too late, my body wouldn't recover well. I feared that by the time my child grew up, I'd already be too old. I wanted to get married immediately, even considering a flash marriage. I started to accept divorced men, but only those with good conditions. I refused to consider anyone with kids, and even if they didn't have children, I couldn't accept them still visiting their ex's kids. I knew I was being selfish, but I had my bottom line. By then, regret consumed me. The men I had known in my 20s were all better than the ones I was meeting now. Eventually, under pressure from my family, I settled for a man 10 years older than me. He had an annual income of 200,000 renminbi and was divorced. He smoked and drank, which I couldn't stand, and we argued about it constantly. He had a son, and on weekends, I had to help take care of him. I resented it. I felt unwilling and unsatisfied. Once again, I ended things. Now, at 40, I am still unmarried. My family has stopped pushing me. They've given up, letting me live however I choose. I reflect on my life so far, wishing there was such a thing as a regret pill that could take me back to my 20s. If I had another chance, I'd make better choices. I've let too much slip through my fingers. I'm a 38-year-old woman with a master's degree, yet I'm still single, a leftover woman, as some might say. For years, I told myself that as long as I was educated and independent, marriage would always be an option. I thought I had all the time in the world. But now I see how wrong I was. People often claim that older single men are more desperate to get married than women like me. But the reality is, no matter how old a woman gets, even if she's 70, no one is going out of their way to find her a husband. Women don't have the same safety net that older men do. And yet, here I am, only 38, and already past my expiration date in the eyes of society. Looking back, I can't say this outcome is entirely unexpected. When I was 30, my standards were sky high. I could instantly rule out 90% of men without a second thought. My non-negotiable? He had to be at least 183 centimeters tall, because I refused to settle for anything less. Everything else? Well, I told myself I was flexible. But the result? No one even wanted to introduce me to anyone. The first thing they'd say was, "You're too old." Imagine that, dismissing me as too old, while I was the one rejecting men over something as trivial as a few centimeters in height. Now, I've become the textbook definition of a leftover woman. On the surface, I might appear to have it all together, an advanced degree, a stable job, but reality is much harsher than it seems. Every single day, I carry the weight of my choices, and the pressure is suffocating. Even my own family has distanced themselves from me. My mother and brother, who once had such high hopes for my future, now look at me with nothing but disappointment. A stagnant career, a non-existent love life. Despite all my efforts, I have nothing to show for it. I've finally reached the point where I'm ready to admit defeat. This year, I'll most likely spend the new year alone. To make things even worse, I have a property in Huizhou with over 2.5 million renminbi in mortgage debt. I once thought owning property was a sign of success, but now it's nothing but a financial burden. If I don't sell it, I won't even be able to keep up with the payments. And what about love? I've lowered my standards again and again. But even now, I still can't find the right person. The men who show interest in me, I don't like them. And the ones I do like, they don't see me as an option. It's ironic, really. I spent years believing I had endless choices, when in reality, my options were slipping away with every passing year. Now, I can't even afford the small luxuries I once enjoyed. Life keeps getting harder, and the dream of marriage feels more distant than ever. The most disheartening part? I once thought I could always rely on finding a safety net husband, someone who would be willing to take me in when I was ready to settle down. But that fantasy has completely crumbled. These so-called backup guys have wised up. They're no longer just desperate men willing to take whatever they can get. Now, they care about fertility, emotional stability, and what a woman can actually bring to a relationship. Even the rural bachelors, men who once had no real choices, are now chasing after younger, prettier women. They don't even consider women like me anymore. It's almost laughable. Here I am, an elite leftover woman, and yet, not a single pig or dog is interested in this so-called good cabbage. I can't even find someone to settle for. Looking back, I only have myself to blame. I wasted the best years of my life believing I could have it all. I thought I was better than the men who pursued me. I thought I could demand the perfect partner while offering nothing but age and arrogance in return. Now I'm left with nothing but regret. And honestly, I'm exhausted. This is just too hard.
I was born in 1989, and now I'm 36, still unmarried, childless, and living alone in Ningbo, Zhejiang. Lately, I've been feeling incredibly anxious. Once the new year passes, I'll be entering my third Chinese zodiac birth year, and reality is finally catching up to me. I'm not young anymore. I used to think time was on my side, but I was wrong. If I keep waiting, I'll reach a point where having a child won't even be an option. By then, I won't just be an older woman. I'll be invisible, completely overlooked. If I had been smarter, maybe things wouldn't feel so bleak. If I had built a solid financial foundation, at least I'd have stability. But the truth is, I wasted too much time thinking I had endless choices. Now I see how limited they really are. Marriage isn't getting easier, it's getting harder. The men I once ignored now won't even look at me. If I wait any longer, I'll be left with two options: become a stepmother to someone else's kids, or settle for a much older man. The days of choosing a partner on my terms are long gone. But what truly haunts me is the thought of never becoming a mother. That, to me, would be the greatest regret of all. I spent so many years believing I had all the time in the world, but now, time is the one thing I no longer have. For a long time, I comforted myself with the idea that I wasn't alone. There are plenty of unmarried men and women in China. That logic worked for a while. But lately, I've been lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, asking myself, is this really the life I wanted? Sure, I can get by right now. I only have myself to take care of. One person eats, and no one goes hungry. But what about in 10 or 20 years? I'll be old, alone, and financially vulnerable. I'll become one of those elderly women in viral videos, waiting for charity, hoping someone will take pity on me and send a bag of rice. That's the future I'm headed for. And by the time I regret my choices, it'll be too late. That is what true despair looks like. So now, no matter what, I want to have a child. Even if my circumstances aren't perfect, even if it's not ideal, I need to do this. At the very least, it will give my life purpose, something to work toward. Because right now, my life feels completely empty. I spent so many years thinking I could do whatever I wanted, that marriage and children would always be an option. But I was wrong. I let time slip away, and now I'm stuck, drifting through each day, going through the motions, with no real direction. And honestly, I hate it.